You've probably asked yourself, at least once, whether you're doing okay. Not compared to billionaires or celebrities, not compared to the curated highlight reels of social media, but compared to normal people, regular people. The kind of people who work jobs and pay rent and worry about their bills and wonder if they're falling behind. You have probably wondered where you stand in the great invisible ranking of financial life, whether your savings are adequate, whether your debt is shameful, whether the anxiety you feel about money is a personal failing or a shared condition. And you have probably searched for answers, looked at statistics, read articles that told you what the average American earns or saves or owes, hoping that these numbers would provide some clarity, some benchmark against which you could measure yourself and finally know, am I doing okay? But here is the problem with that question, and it is a problem that nobody talks about because acknowledging it would undermine an entire industry of comparison and aspiration. The numbers are lying to you. Not intentionally, not through malice, but through a statistical sleight of hand that makes the average person appear far more prosperous than they actually are. And until you understand this deception, until you see the machinery behind the misleading numbers, you will continue measuring yourself against a standard that almost nobody actually achieves, feeling inadequate for failing to reach a benchmark that was never real in the first place. Let me show you what I mean. When you hear that the average American household earns $70,000 or $80,000 a year, you are hearing a mean, not a median. The mean is calculated by adding up all the incomes and dividing by the number of households. This sounds fair until you realize what it actually does. It lets a small number of extremely high earners pull the entire number upward. If you have a room with 9 people earning $40,000 and 1 person earning $4 million, the average income in that room is $436,000. But nobody in that room except 1 person earns anywhere near that. The average is mathematically correct and experientially meaningless. The median tells a different story. The median is the number where half of people earn more and half earn less. It is the actual middle, unaffected by billionaires at the top distorting the picture. And in America, the median household income is significantly lower than the mean, somewhere around $60,000 depending on the year and the measurement. But even this number hides enormous variation. The median in Manhattan is not the median in rural Mississippi. The median for a household with 2 working adults is not the median for a single parent. Every time you see a national average, you're seeing a number smoothed across such vast differences that it describes almost no one's actual reality. This matters because comparison shapes behavior. When you believe that the average person earns more than you actually earn, you feel poor even if you are not. When you believe that normal people have more savings than normal people actually have, you feel like a failure for being average. The statistics create a false standard, and measuring yourself against that standard generates shame, anxiety, and sometimes reckless decisions to close a gap that is not as large as you think. The average is a lie, and the first step toward understanding how people are actually doing with money is to stop believing it. So let us talk about how people are actually doing. And I will warn you now, the picture is not pretty, but it might be more relatable than you expect. The majority of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. This is not an exaggeration. This is not poverty porn designed to make you feel bad. This is what surveys consistently show, year after year, across different income levels and different demographics. Somewhere between 50 and 60% of workers, depending on the study, report that they would struggle to cover an unexpected $500 expense without borrowing money or selling something. More than half of the workforce, in the richest country in the history of the world, operates without meaningful financial margin. And here is what might surprise you. This is not just a low-income phenomenon. High earners live paycheck to paycheck too. People making 6 figures, people who appear successful by every external measure, people whose incomes would have seemed extraordinary to their grandparents, still report that they are 1 bad month away from crisis. How is this possible? How can someone earn $100,000 or more and still have nothing left at the end of the month? The answer is lifestyle inflation, and it is the invisible enemy that devours income at every level. When you earn more, you spend more. Not because you are greedy or irresponsible, but because your reference point shifts. The apartment that felt luxurious at $50,000 feels cramped at $75,000. The car that seemed fine at $75,000 seems embarrassing at $100,000. The neighborhood, the restaurants, the vacations, the schools, the clothes, all of it calibrates upward as income rises, and before you know it, You are earning twice what you used to earn and saving exactly the same amount. Nothing. This is why income alone does not equal financial security. You can earn your way into a higher tax bracket without earning your way into wealth. You can double your salary and double your anxiety because you have doubled your expenses and your exposure. The person earning $50,000 who saves 10% is building something. The person earning $100,000 who saves nothing is renting a lifestyle they will lose the moment their income stops. Income is not the variable that determines financial outcomes. The gap between income and spending is the variable, and for most people at most income levels that gap is approximately zero. But the paycheck-to-paycheck statistics do not exist in a vacuum. They are shaped by geography in ways that national numbers completely obscure. Earning $60,000 in San Francisco is not the same as earning $60,000 in Omaha. In San Francisco, $60,000 might cover a room in a shared apartment with little left over. In Omaha, it might fund a comfortable life with money to spare. The cost of housing, food, transportation, childcare, healthcare, all of it varies so dramatically across the country that comparing yourself to national statistics is almost meaningless. This is why financial advice that ignores geography is often useless. The suggestion to save 20% of your income sounds reasonable until you live somewhere that requires 110% of your income just to exist. The suggestion to buy instead of rent makes sense in markets where buying is possible, but there are cities where the median home costs 15 or 20 times the median income, where the math simply does not work for regular people with regular jobs. Financial success is relative to location. The same behaviors that build wealth in one place lead to debt in another. And yet we consume advice as if everyone lives in the same economic reality, as if a single set of rules applies equally to a nurse in Cleveland and a teacher in Brooklyn. So if paycheck to paycheck is the default, if lifestyle inflation eats income at every level, if geography determines comfort more than salary, how is anyone building wealth? How do the people who actually get ahead manage to do it when the entire system seems designed to keep everyone treading water? The answer is simpler and more boring than you might expect. The people who build wealth are not smarter, they are not luckier, they do not have access to special investments or secret strategies. They do one thing that most people do not do: they automate good behavior and then leave it alone. This brings us to one of the most expensive mistakes in personal finance, a mistake that costs more than almost any other: trying to time the market. Timing the market means attempting to predict when stocks will go up and when they will go down, selling before drops and buying before rises. It sounds intelligent, it sounds like what smart investors should do, and it destroys wealth more reliably than almost any other strategy. Here is why. The stock market's long-term returns are driven by a small number of exceptional days. Studies have shown that if you missed just the 10 best days in the market over a 20-year period, your returns would be cut roughly in half. Miss the 20 best days and you might barely break even. Miss the 30 best days and you would have lost money. And here is the problem. Nobody knows when those days will occur. They often happen during periods of extreme volatility, during the very moments when fear is highest and the temptation to sell is strongest. The best days frequently follow the worst days. The recoveries come precisely when it feels most dangerous to be invested. This means that the person who panics and sells during a crash is not just missing the pain of further decline, they are missing the snapback that erases that pain. They are locking in losses at the bottom and then watching from the sidelines as the market recovers without them. And because they sold low, they now face an impossible psychological challenge: buying back in at higher prices than they sold, admitting that their fear cost them money, and doing so while still feeling the same fear that made them sell in the first place. Most people cannot do it. Most people stay in cash, watching the market climb, waiting for the next drop that will justify their exit, and that drop either does not come or comes after gains they missed entirely. The boring truth is that doing nothing outperforms almost every active strategy. The person who invests consistently, who ignores the news, who does not check their portfolio daily, who lets decades pass without intervention, almost always beats the person who tries to be clever. Not because the passive investor is smarter, because they make fewer decisions, and every decision is an opportunity for error. But even understanding this, even knowing intellectually that timing the market is destructive, most people cannot help themselves. They see the news, they feel the fear, they make the call or click the button that turns a temporary decline into a permanent loss. And this is where financial literacy becomes not just useful but essential. Financial illiteracy has a real cost. measurable in dollars, and that cost is enormous. Studies suggest that people with low financial literacy lose thousands of dollars per year compared to their more informed peers. Not through dramatic mistakes, but through accumulated small errors. Higher interest rates on loans because they did not shop around, excessive fees on investments because they did not understand the alternatives, missed tax advantages because they did not know they existed, credit card interest that compounds because they do not grasp how compound interest works against them. These are not character failures, they are knowledge failures, and knowledge failures are fixable. You do not need to become a financial expert, you do not need to understand derivatives, or read quarterly reports or master the intricacies of tax law. You need to understand a handful of fundamental concepts applied consistently, and those concepts will do more for your financial life than any amount of sophistication applied randomly. The concepts are simple: spend less than you earn, invest the difference in diversified low-cost funds, avoid high-interest debt, have an emergency fund, understand the power of compound interest and give it time to work. That is most of what you need. It fits on an index card. It requires no genius. And yet most people do not do it, not because they cannot, but because no one ever taught them that these simple behaviors, executed consistently, produce extraordinary results over time. And speaking of emergency funds, let us talk about what the absence of one actually costs. The statistics say that a large percentage of Americans cannot cover an unexpected $400 expense without borrowing. $400, not $4,000, not $40,000, $400. This is the price of a minor car repair, a small medical bill, a broken appliance. This is not catastrophe. This is ordinary life. And ordinary life, for most people, is enough to trigger financial crisis. When you have no emergency fund, every surprise becomes an emergency. The car repair goes on a credit card at 20% interest. The medical bill becomes a payment plan that stretches for months. The broken appliance becomes a payday loan with fees that amount to triple-digit interest rates. The absence of a few $100s in savings costs thousands in interest and fees over time. Fragility is expensive, security is cheap by comparison, but the cost of no emergency fund is not just financial, it is psychological. The person with no buffer lives in a constant state of low-grade anxiety, knowing that any disruption could cascade into catastrophe. This anxiety affects sleep, relationships, work performance, decision-making. It creates a scarcity mindset that, as we discussed earlier, hijacks cognition and makes long-term thinking nearly impossible. The emergency fund is not just money, it is mental health. It is the ability to think clearly. It is the foundation that makes everything else possible. Even modest savings dramatically improve psychological well-being. Research shows that the relationship between savings and life satisfaction is not linear. The first few $1,000s saved produce enormous gains in happiness and stress reduction. The next few thousand produce smaller gains. The relationship flattens as balances grow. This means that if you have nothing saved, your first priority should be building a buffer, not investing, not optimizing, not worrying about returns. $1,000 in a savings account will do more for your quality of life than almost any other financial action you could take. And yet most people focus on complexity before they have addressed this foundation. But let us talk about the bigger picture, the longer term, the question of what happens when current income stops. Let us talk about retirement, and let us acknowledge that for most people, the retirement system is either broken or ignored. A significant share of American workers have no access to employer-sponsored retirement plans, no 401k, no pension, no automatic mechanism for setting aside money for the future. They could open an IRA on their own, but this requires initiative, knowledge, and discipline that busy people struggling with daily expenses often cannot muster. The absence of automatic enrollment means that retirement saving requires active effort, and active effort fails far more often than passive systems. Even among workers who do have access to retirement plans, participation rates are lower than they should be, and contribution rates are lower still. People opt out because the money feels needed now. They contribute at minimal levels because the default settings are minimal. They withdraw early and pay penalties because the emergency fund that should have handled the crisis does not exist. By the time they realize how important retirement savings are, decades of potential compounding have been lost. This is why systems matter more than intentions. The person whose employer automatically enrolls them in a 401k and automatically escalates their contributions over time will almost certainly end up with more retirement savings than the person who has to actively choose to save each month, not because of discipline, because of defaults. The system that makes good behavior automatic outperforms the system that requires willpower. And for most people, willpower is exactly what fails when money is tight and the future feels impossibly far away. And now let us confront something uncomfortable. Even people who appear wealthy are often not as secure as you think. The millionaire next door, the person with a 7-figure net worth, might still feel broke. This sounds absurd until you understand what net worth actually measures and what it does not. Net worth is assets minus liabilities. If you own a home worth $500,000 and have a mortgage of $400,000, that home contributes $100,000 to your net worth, but you cannot spend your net worth. You cannot eat your home equity, you live in it. The millionaire whose net worth is concentrated in real estate and retirement accounts might have less cash available for daily life than someone with half their net worth but more liquid assets. And then there is inflation, the silent thief that erodes the meaning of every milestone. $1 million is not what it used to be. Adjusted for inflation, the millionaire of 1980 would need roughly $4 million today to have equivalent purchasing power. The benchmarks we inherited from previous generations no longer mean what they once meant. Retirement calculators that assumed certain nest egg targets were built in a different era. The person who reaches $1 million and expects to feel secure might discover that security requires more than they were promised. This is not to say that net worth does not matter. It does. But net worth is not the same as cash flow, and cash flow is not the same as peace of mind. You can be a millionaire on paper and stressed about money. You can have a modest net worth and feel secure because your expenses are low, your income is stable, and your buffer is sufficient. The relationship between wealth and well-being is real, but not straightforward. And comparing yourself to millionaire status as a benchmark of success might be missing the point entirely. So what actually determines financial outcomes? If high income does not guarantee security, if millionaire status does not guarantee peace, if the statistics are misleading and the advice is often useless, what separates the people who end up okay from the people who struggle forever? The answer is behavior. Wealth is behavior, not income. The behaviors are boring. Spend less than you earn, invest the difference, avoid high-interest debt, maintain a buffer, give compound interest time to work. These behaviors, executed consistently over decades, produce results that feel almost magical to people who never learned them. But there is no magic. There is only consistency. There is only the gap between income and expenses, captured and invested, compounding quietly while you live your life. Systems beat motivation. The automatic transfer beats the monthly decision. The 401k contribution beats the intention to save. The credit card that stays in the drawer beats the willpower to not use it. You cannot rely on yourself to make good decisions consistently because you are human, and humans are inconsistent. You can only build systems that make good decisions for you, that execute regardless of how you feel, that turn discipline into architecture. Consistency beats intensity. The person who saves $100 every month for 30 years will almost certainly end up wealthier than the person who saves intensely for a few years and then stops. The marathon beats the sprint. The steady contribution beats the sporadic burst. This is counterintuitive because intensity feels more impressive, more dramatic, more worthy of pride. But compound interest does not care about drama. It cares about time, and time favors the consistent over the intense. This is why awareness is the first lever, the foundation that makes everything else possible. Before you can improve your financial life, you have to see it clearly. You have to know what you earn, what you spend, what you owe, and what you own. Not approximately, exactly. Most people do not know these numbers, and not knowing them makes improvement impossible. You cannot close a gap you cannot measure. You cannot fix a leak you cannot see. The first step toward financial progress is not action. It is observation. Seeing where you actually stand without flinching, without lying to yourself, without the comfortable vagueness that protects you from uncomfortable truths. Most people are not bad with money, they are uninformed about money. There is a difference. Bad implies moral failing, character flaw, something broken at the core. Uninformed implies missing knowledge, absent education, gaps that can be filled. The person who does not save is not usually lazy or irresponsible. They usually do not understand compounding, do not feel the future loss that their present behavior creates, do not have the framework that makes saving feel rational, rather than sacrificial. Give them the framework and many of them will change. Not all, but many. Enough to transform their lives. And this is where I want to land, because this is where everything we have discussed comes together. The average person is not doing well with money. This is not judgment. This is statistics. Most people live paycheck to paycheck. Most people have inadequate emergency funds. Most people are not saving enough for retirement. Most people carry debt that shapes their choices and limits their options. Most people measure themselves against misleading averages and feel bad about their normal situation. This is the reality that nobody wants to acknowledge, because acknowledging it feels like admitting failure. But here is the reframe that changes everything. If most people are struggling, then struggling does not make you unusual. It makes you normal. And if the causes of struggling are largely behavioral and informational rather than moral, then improvement is possible, not guaranteed. Possible. The statistics are grim, but the statistics describe populations, not individuals. You are not a statistic. You are a person who can learn, who can change, who can build systems and develop habits that move you away from the average towards something better. The path is not complicated. Build an emergency fund before anything else. Automate savings so you do not have to decide each month. Invest in simple, diversified, low-cost funds and leave them alone. Understand that timing the market destroys wealth, and patience builds it. Know your numbers so you can improve them. Ignore national averages that describe no one's reality. Focus on the gap between income and expenses, not the absolute level of either. Recognize that lifestyle inflation is the enemy, and combat it by automating savings before you see the money. Understand that debt is a tool that can destroy you if misused, and use it sparingly if at all. Remember that millionaire status is not the goal. Security and peace of mind are the goals, and they can be achieved at far more modest levels. The average person is struggling, but you do not have to be average, not because you are special or superior, but because average is the result of default behaviors, and default behaviors can be changed. The same systems that trap most people can be rebuilt to lift you. The same psychology that drives lifestyle inflation can be redirected toward automatic saving. The same fear that causes panic selling can be managed through education and perspective. Nothing about your financial future is fixed. Everything about it is a choice, made daily, compounding over time into the life you will eventually live. The statistics tell you how most people are doing. They do not tell you how you have to do. The averages describe the past behavior of millions of people who did not know what you now know. You know that the numbers lie. You know that paycheck to paycheck is a choice disguised as inevitability. You know that geography matters and comparison is meaningless. You know that timing the market fails and patience succeeds. You know that financial literacy pays and ignorance costs. You know that emergency funds create stability and their absence creates fragility. You know that retirement systems require intentional participation. You know that lifestyle inflation eats income at every level. You know that debt is normalized but not neutral. You know that millionaire status is not the same as security. You know that behavior determines outcomes, not income. You know that awareness precedes improvement. The question is not whether you know these things. The question is what you will do with what you know. Knowledge without action is entertainment. This video, like every video, changes nothing unless you change something. The people who watch and nod and agree, and then continue exactly as before, are the same people who will answer surveys about financial stress 5 years from now, still paycheck to paycheck, still without emergency funds, still measuring themselves against averages that describe no one. You can be different. Not through heroic effort or special talent, through the boring, consistent, automated behaviors that most people never adopt because nobody taught them, and the system profits from their ignorance. The financial industry makes money when you trade frequently, borrow constantly, and spend everything you earn. They do not make money when you invest passively, avoid debt, and build wealth quietly over decades. The incentives are misaligned. The advice is often compromised. You have to think for yourself, see the system clearly, and build something that serves your interest rather than theirs. The average person is struggling with money. This is true and this is sad, but the average is not a destination. It is a description of where most people end up when they follow default paths and accept default outcomes. You can take a different path. You can build different defaults. You can become someone who, 5 years from now, looks back at this moment as the beginning of something that changed everything. Or you can watch another video, feel momentarily inspired, and continue exactly as you were. The average is always available. The alternative requires choice.